São Paulo state in Brazil is making the coronavirus vaccine mandatory for its 46 million inhabitants. The vaccine in question is made by Chinese biotech firm Sinovac. Brazil is one of the hardest hit countries in the world with over 177,000 deaths. Earlier today, I spoke to the Washington Post's Brazil correspondent, Terrence McCoy, and I asked about the contrast between the São Paulo governor mandating the shots and Brazil's President Bolsonaro, who has largely dismissed the seriousness of the pandemic and says he won't get the vaccine. Here's what he said.
This is a story of what happens in a country that's devastated by disease in an absence of federal leadership. From the very beginning of the pandemic, Jair Bolsonaro has been a coronavirus skeptic. He has called it little more than a little cold, a little flu. He has called on Brazilians to pretty much ignore any sort of measures that officials put into place to stay at home. He says, go back out into the streets, you need to get back into churches. He pretty much says that people just need to live their lives and take their lumps. He said repeatedly that we're all going to die. We're all going to die, and we just need to accept that. And part of his, when he says that, is we just need to go back in the streets and accept that this virus is a part of the Brazilian destiny at this point. And now this drama over the vaccine is really representing and illustrating this divide that we're seeing in Brazil between federal government that has done very, very little to combat this disease, and then state governors who are saying we have to do more. And on one side of that is the governor of São Paulo, João, who says the vaccine, it doesn't really, it needs to be mandatory. Everyone needs to take it.
So I guess the question is, though, how do you force people to take a vaccine? I mean, do you punish them if they don't? How do you keep track of it? What's the plan?
Yeah, that's the question is, this is forced vaccine doesn't sound pleasant to anybody. Nobody wants to be, chased around their house with somebody with a needle. But that's definitely not what's going to happen here, what people say. And the truth of the matter is that there are already vaccines in Brazil that are mandatory. And it's much the same way that it happens in the United States. You have people can't join schools. They might not be able to get benefits they would otherwise be able to get. So the vaccine is mandatory, but in no way is it forced to be. People need to take it like someone's going to tie you down and give you the vaccine. It's more or less disqualifying you from joining into society in a lot of different ways. But even that, is an uncomfortable prospect for a lot of people, because you have a vaccine that has gone through a warp speed process. And even then, people are saying, I'm hesitant about this. And Brazil is a country, much like the United States, has been inundated with disinformation and fake news when it comes to vaccines. And in addition to that, we have a president who's saying himself, I'm not going to get vaccinated. So you have a whole bunch of people in the country who say, I'm worried about this. So this reckoning is coming in the next few weeks, in the next month or two, about what's going to happen here.
So you talked about, the warp speed of the vaccine, and I think there certainly is a significant percentage of the population here in the U.S. that is concerned about that process. But this is a vaccine that's coming from China. Have you heard concerns about that?
Yeah, and this is something that's happened in the last several months, is that one of the two vaccines has been one of the leading candidates here in Brazil is the vaccine Sinovac, by the Chinese biotech firm Sinovac. And there has been increasing rhetoric, specifically among Bolsonaro supporters, that has been xenophobic, if not racist, about using a vaccine that comes from China. And this has been a sticking point in Brazil, specifically among Bolsonaro and his supporters, that many of them say the virus, according to all evidence, came from China, so now we're supposed to take this vaccine that comes from China too. And it has become something that Bolsonaro uses often in his rhetoric, where he says the Chinese vaccine of João Doria. And João Doria is the governor of São Paulo. And this has become one more piece of evidence that, one more bit of information that Bolsonaro is using to undermine the public's faith and trust in a vaccine that has, as we know so far, passed all of the tests that were required to be able to use for mass vaccination.
You also mentioned misinformation and disinformation is a problem. It's a problem here as well. have they put together, or are they developing, some sort of information campaign? I think if there's one thing that I've noticed that has been a failure in terms of how the coronavirus has been handled here, is there hasn't been a strong public health message, a strong campaign encouraging people to wear masks because it's the patriotic thing to do or the right thing to do, just make people feel better about it. Are they doing something like that there when it comes to getting vaccinated?
Not a lot so far. And that's an issue, is that in Brazil, unlike the United States or unlike Europe, Brazil has been a country and a population that's overwhelmingly receptive to vaccines. People overwhelmingly support vaccines historically. There's been this mascot here in Brazil that kind of looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy of the vaccine mascot. And he's been, a lot of the propaganda that the government uses to try to show people that vaccines are safe and you can use them. He's come out and tried to dissuade people that this is okay. And we haven't really seen this mascot yet so far. So there has been an absence of persuasion here. And in the absence of that persuasion, you have a governor on the other side saying it's going to be compulsory and mandatory. So there has been a lot of concern among public health experts that saying if you're not going to try to persuade people, you're going to say it's compulsory. That could then get people into a situation where the debate gets polarized and more people are going to say, I don't want to take the vaccine.
For more interviews and compelling stories like this, join me every weekday morning at 7 a.m. Eastern for CBSN AM. We will get you caught up on all the news overnight and tell you what you need to know to get your day started.